이스라엘의 메시아닉주 청년과 또 팔레스타인 크리스천 청년들이 한자리에 모여서 함께 기도하고 찬양하는 그런 컨퍼런스가 있다고 합니다. 원킹이라는 이름으로 모이는 그런 컨퍼런스인데요. 작년에 이어서 금년에도 6월부터 시작이 된다고 합니다. 오늘은 그 원킹 컨퍼런스를 준비하고 계시는 사무엘 윗필드 씨를 모시고 어떤 컨퍼런스인지 그리고 어떻게 진행되는지 함께 이야기를 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 이렇게 나오셔서 고맙습니다.
Thank you.
제가 조금 전에 원킹 컨퍼런스에 대해서 이야기를 했는데 제가 알기로는 그 이전에도 예전에 그 엘라브라고 하는 컨퍼런스가 있다라고 제가 알고 있어요. 그 엘라브 컨퍼런스도 팔레스타인 청년들하고 또 이스라엘의 메시아닉주 청년들하고 같이 찬양하고 기도하는 그런 컨퍼런스가 있는데 그 엘라브 컨퍼런스하고 원킹 컨퍼런스하고 어떤 차이가 있습니까?
The Elav conference, of course, is a conference within Israel that is bringing together the young adults, both Jewish and Arab. It's been going on for many years and bearing fruit in the land. When we launched the One King Conference, our goal was to bring young adults from other nations of the earth, bring them to Israel, create a context where they could meet the believers in the land, could interact with them, could experience God's heart, both for the Jewish believers and the Arab believers in the land, and connect them to God's purposes for Israel. So Elav is an excellent conference for the believers in the land. With One King, our goal is to call young adults from other nations, come to the land, experience what God's doing, and get God's heart for both the Jewish and the Arab believers in the land.
팔레스타인 청년 크리스천들하고 또 이스라엘의 메시아닉주 청년 크리스천들 또 열방에서 온 크리스천 청년들이 이렇게 함께 모여서 찬양하고 기도하는 아주 특별한 그런 모임이 될 것 같은데 작년에 이어서 금년이 두 번째라고 들었습니다. 작년은 어땠었습니까?
Yes, our first conference, of course, was last summer, and we were very pleased with it. And what really touched my heart were we had several moments where those who came in from the nations gathered together with Messianic young adults, believers, as well as Arab young adults, and we had moments of powerful intercession together, sharing together, and the people that came with us got to experience something that doesn't get talked about, which is what God is doing in the land. You know, many times the news stories are about the political events in the land, or maybe sometimes they're just negative things in the Middle East, but God's really doing something, both among the Messianic Jewish community and even among Arab believers as well. And so what was so special to me last year were some of the moments we had of prayer and intercession together were powerful. The moments we had worshiping together right there in Jerusalem, even during Ramadan, we were there worshiping, lifting up the name of Jesus. And it was just powerful to be together worshiping, and for those who came to begin to see and experience what God is doing. It's not just the negative things on the news. God is doing something powerful among the believers in the land, and it was powerful to see them get to connect to that and build relationships so those who came in the future can be more connected to what God's doing and support it over the years to come.
그런데 말이 그렇지 이게 팔레스타인 크리스천 청년들 또 메시아닉주 청년들 한 자리에 모으는 것도 쉽지 않을 것 같고요. 우선 팔레스타인 크리스천 청년들에게 이렇게 이런 행사가 있으니까 좀 같이 참여합시다. 그들을 설득하는 것도 쉽지 않을 것 같아요.
Like you said, and sometimes it seems that there's a great separation between the Jewish believers and the Arab believers. In my experience, what I find is many times when you get in Israel, the believers in Israel are taking those steps to work together. So, for example, last summer, what we did is the believers we worked with in the land, Jewish believers and Arab believers, the ones we worked with, they're already working together with each other. You know, one of the things, it sometimes seems like you have to choose either the Jewish believers or the Arab believers, like there's some kind of separation. But the truth is, in the gospel, Jesus actually secures the destiny of all people. We don't have to choose, do we support the Jewish believers in the land or we support Arab believers? In the gospel, we actually can support God's divine calling for each people group. So in terms of how we experienced that last year, what I would say is the local believers we worked with, they demonstrated how they're working together. And certainly that is complex and even at times difficult, but we look to them to demonstrate they are really working together and building relationship, and we simply allow them to show that to the people coming over, that in the bond of the gospel, loving each other in Jesus, they are making those steps to bring a reconciliation that cannot happen any other way.
두 민족이 이렇게 처음 한 자리에 모이면 서로 어색해하지 않습니까?
There certainly are groups within Israel that don't get together, but I think part of the story we need to tell to the nations is that there are believers in the land that are working towards this reconciliation. That I don't think it gets talked about enough. That most, I would even say most of the believers in the land want to work together. The Jewish believers love the Arab believers and want to work with them. And there are many Arab believers that also want to reconcile and work together. They both want to see both the Jewish people and the Arab people, the Palestinian people, come to the gospel. And so, yes, of course, there are difficulties and it is not easy, but my experience is so many of the believers in the land actually are working to make that happen. They're joining together, they're sharing with each other, and I think part of our part as believers in the nations is to tell that story, is to say, yes, it's difficult, sure, it is complex, but they are working towards it and it's happening. And what they're demonstrating is a love for each other that can actually only come under the gospel of Jesus. Meaning politically, there's big difficulties, big challenges. Ethnically and culturally, big differences and big challenges. But in the gospel, I've found when I'm in Israel that so many of the believers in Israel are actually working to cross those boundaries, loving, their Arab brothers and sisters from the Messianics, or loving and wanting to reach out. And sure, there are difficulties and it's sometimes complicated, but most of the body is wanting to make that happen.
이스라엘 사람과 팔레스타인 사람들이 서로 화해하고 서로 사랑하는 거 당사자들이 하면 되는데 우리 사무엘 씨나 저 같은 미국 사람이나 한국 사람들 이방인의 역할은 뭐라고 생각하십니까?
The Gentiles' role in the reconciliation of the Jewish people and the Arab people. I think one part of our role is actually to stand in the place of intercession. Paul, I think of Paul in Romans chapter 9. Paul is an apostle sent to the Gentiles. But in Romans 9, he says, I have unceasing anguish or deep pain in my soul for my Jewish brethren. And so you see Paul, while he's laboring to reach nations, and of course among the Gentiles would be the Arab people and the Palestinian people, he's still in his heart, he's also saying, pray with me, for the Jewish people as well. I think the first thing in the nations is actually prayer. God invites us to pray. In Isaiah 62, he says, don't let me rest until Jerusalem is a praise in the earth. So I think we should be interceding for the Jewish believers and the Arab believers, number one. I think the second thing is one of the ways we can do it is to tell that story. Meaning the story in the nations is that Israel is at odds, that there is no solution. But part of the story is a solution is happening. And so we need to tell their story. And thirdly, I think we need to both, whether it's through prayer, telling the story, through other ways, we need to build partnership with, first of all, with the Jewish believers in the land. Many of us who love Israel in the past, sometimes that support for Israel has only been political. So we say, how do we help the country of Israel? And that's important. But we haven't gone further and said, how do we help the believers in Israel, the ones that love Jesus, love Yeshua? How do we help them? And I think at the same time though, one of the critical things is we haven't also extended our hand to help the Arab believers. So not only in the land of Israel, but in the countries surrounding, we sometimes assume those are Muslim countries. We say, oh, that's the Muslim world. And we actually need to recognize that God's doing great things around Israel as well. And I think the global church needs to actually get behind the Arab believers as well, build those bonds of friendship, say, how can we help you preach the gospel? How can we see the gospel extend in that region. So I think we need to support the believers that are demonstrating love, mutual affection for each other. I think as believers in the nations, we need to make the issue of Jesus central in the question about Israel. Of course, God has very unique promises for Israel. We stand with those and we support those. But God has also woven those two stories together. For example, in Genesis 3, when God comes to Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation. But he says, and all the people of the earth are going to be blessed in the process. And as believers in the nations, I think we need to remain committed that Israel needs to come into her unique destiny, but God's connected that to the people in the nations of the earth as well. In other words, God wants to bring Israel into her destiny and the nations together. And part of that is saying, while we support Israel, how can we partner with the believing body, the Palestinians and the Arabs in the region? How can we also partner with them? How can we support them? How can we tell the story that God's committed to the salvation of all people? And the best way in my experience is we make Jesus central in the conversation, meaning Israel cannot come into her destiny, right, into the fullness of her destiny until she comes into Jesus. In other words, to fully support Israel, we have to support Israel loving Jesus, right? And at the same time, Paul tells us Israel's not going to come into her full destiny until Gentiles provoke her or come into their destiny alongside her. And so I think when we make Jesus the central issue, meaning Israel needs to come to Jesus for her destiny, but guess what? God's not going to do that unless the Arab people as well come into their destiny and the Palestinian people as well come into their destiny through Jesus. I think that's the primary issue because many times, even in the church, the conversation is, who do you support politically? And certainly politics are important, they're a part of our life. But I think the first issue is the way I relate to the Jewish people in the land or the way I relate to the Palestinian. Am I first delivering the gospel to them? Am I giving them the key that comes into their destiny? And so I think as believers in the nations, we should support what's already happening because so many of the believers in the land are working towards that reconciliation. Let's tell their story. Let's show the world that it's happening. But let's also take a Jesus-centered approach that says, I don't have to pick Israel or the Palestinian. Israel certainly has unique promises, but I should be building a relationship with both and saying, what can we do to see the gospel expand? What can we do to see your people come to Jesus? Because that's the only way they're going to find true reconciliation with each other.
이스라엘 사람과 팔레스타인 사람들이 이 예수 그리스도의 사랑이라는 이름 아래서 이렇게 한자리에 모여서 함께 찬양하고 기도할 때 그 현장에는 정말 많은 간증거리들이 나올 것 같아요. 작년에 그 현장에서 많은 간증을 우리 사무엘 씨도 들었을 것 같습니다. 이 자리에서 함께 은혜를 나눌 수 있을 만한 그런 간증 이야기를 좀 들려주시겠습니까?
One was one evening of the conference. We were actually, of course, in Jerusalem, meeting in Jerusalem. We're during Ramadan, which of course is the Islamic month of prayer during the year. And we spent one of the main sessions, spent an extended amount of time in prayer. And we were gathered together. There were Jewish believers in the room, Arab believers in the room, as well as those who had come with us. And we had an extended period of prayer in the middle of Ramadan in Jerusalem, asking God to break through in salvation. That night we prayed specifically even for the Arab people, going, God, break into the city of Jerusalem. And so many in the room were touched. There was actually weeping in the room. A friend of mine who's been a missionary, a worker in the Middle East for many years, had the privilege of being there. And he actually came to me afterwards and says, this is what we need. Not just in Israel, but in the region, joining together in the place of prayer and worship and fighting for or contending for the destiny and the calling of the people in the region. And I just remember in that moment, we were joined together in prayer, and it didn't matter whether we were Gentile, if we were Jewish, or we were Arab. We were asking for God's promises and asking for Him to touch the people. Some of the people that went with us, some of my favorite testimonies afterwards were a young man, for example, sent me a message. He said, hey, I'm getting the opportunity to preach tonight to a college campus group. and I'm able to share with them what God did for my heart. And I remember that young man. I remember him in Nazareth in a prayer room run by an Arab leader in that region. I remember him weeping for the salvation of the Arab people. I remember him in Jerusalem, touched by a ministry there with some Messianic believers, and he was just weeping. And then in Tel Aviv, and another one. And I love the testimony of here a month later, he was back at a college campus. They're saying they're giving me a chance to share what God's doing. And he was able to speak to young adults and tell them God's doing something and connect their heart to it. Another couple who were with us this summer got connected to a ministry that serves those who have been impacted by terrorism. It serves both Jewish and Arab victims of terror in the land. They were able to hear what God's doing, get connected, and actually be part of an event in their country to say, come, in their case, they were from America, and say, come to America, tell us what God's doing, how can we get behind you and support you? And that's opened new areas of relationship and friendship. So for me, it was one of the best testimonies for me was not just what happened at the conference, but afterwards as we went to the land and they visited ministries, seeing God touch their heart, seeing they understand some theology, but now their heart, they begin weeping and seeing what God's doing. And then as they left the land, I saw an increased desire to how do we support them? How do we tell their story? And how do we help others in terms of when they hear Israel, they don't immediately think only of negative things or bad things. They think of what's God doing in the land. How do I support it? How do I commit to it? Things like that.
그런 일을 하다 보면 일이 진행되지 못하도록 사탄의 공격도 좀 많을 거예요. 그럼에도 불구하고 하나님께서 그 일들을 이뤄나가시는 그 기적의 현장도 많이 보셨을 거고요. 작년에 일을 진행해 나가면서 하나님께서 정말로 이 일을 기쁘게 진행해 나가고 계시는구나, 그런 걸 느낄 수 있을 만한 그런 일이 있었으면 좀 얘기를 해 주시죠.
You know, we all know that Jesus made the promise that he's returning to the city of Jerusalem. You know, and even in Matthew 23:39, he said, you're not going to see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So I think what you said is absolutely right. Whenever we begin to engage in God's purposes for Jerusalem, city of Jerusalem in specific, in Israel, there is a pushback, an attack of the enemy. And I can honestly say, since we became more involved in terms of with the believers in the land and wanting to see a stronger relationship in God's purposes, we've certainly felt there's definitely been opposition from the enemy and pressure as well. The greatest strength I've found is other believers standing alongside, coming into place and saying, is working together, but the community, the fellowship of other believers as we've gone forward has helped the most. And as simple as it sounds, also prayer, meaning standing in the place of prayer, asking God for strength, asking God to cover us. So many times we feel his presence, we feel his zeal for Jerusalem, right? The salvation of Jerusalem, according to Matthew 23:39, is directly connected, right, to the return of Jesus to that city. So the controversy around Jerusalem, the controversy in the nations, is connected to the return of God's Son. And practically what helps us is the intercession, the community doing it together with other believers. But what really has sustained us against the pressure is God's desire to put Jesus in Jerusalem as the King of the nations. His desire to save Israel. His desire for his Son to rule over the nations of the earth from Jerusalem. That's really when the opposition comes, the pressure comes, what it sustains me. I think it sustains the rest of us is we know God has a desire. He said it like in Psalm 2, I've set my Son on that hill. In Psalm 110, he's going to stretch out his rule, his authority from Zion. God has a zeal in his heart for Jesus to rule the nations from Jerusalem. And that is ultimately what sustains us and encourages us, even when there's setbacks, is we want to partner with God in His plan to see Jesus rule the nations, to see Jesus return, to see Jesus save Israel, to see Jesus bring the Palestinian people into their calling. That's what sustains us as we labor even when there's oppositions.
이미 2015년에도 한번 행사를 해봤기 때문에 행사를 진행하면서 발견됐던 여러 가지 문제점도 있었을 것이고 그것들을 보완해서 2016년에도 또 행사를 할 때 작년보다 훨씬 더 좋은 행사가 될 것 같아요. 2016년도 원킹 컨퍼런스에서 기대하는 바가 있다면 어떤 겁니까?
We're going a little bit beyond what we did last year. This year we're actually talking about 3 subjects will be our focus. One is, of course, Israel, God's plans and purposes for Israel. The second one is going to be the issue of social justice. You know, many believers and the young adults particularly are asking the question of social justice. What is it? And there are wrong kinds of social justice and right kinds. And sometimes the church does a good job of saying that's not good social justice, but we need to say, what is the right kind of social justice? What is a social justice that exalts Jesus? And of course, the context of Israel raises that question. How do we do social justice in a biblical way? So we're going after that subject. And the third thing is we're going after the subject of Islam. How does the global church together actually answer the question of Islam, present the gospel to the Muslim world? What should be our response to Islam? And so we have some special speakers coming in to help us, some like Joel Richardson and Stuart Greaves and others. We'll have some local believers from the land actually helping us with those subjects as well. So those are some 3 subjects. The main thing I'd like to see out of this year, in building on last year's foundation, is I just love it when particularly young adults from the nations come and when they encounter what God's doing. I like to call it the untold story, meaning again, we hear stories in the news about Israel, Middle East, but we don't usually hear the story of what God's doing. And the Messianic Jewish leaders that are seeing fruit as they labor for the gospel and love their Arab brothers. What God's doing in the Arab Palestinian world, not just within the country of Israel, but God's on the move in Kurdistan and surround Jordan and surrounding nations. He's at work there too. So I love to see the eyes opened as believers come and experience what God's doing. I love the moments of prayer and intercession and worship together. And so those are the moments I'm looking forward to, the moments when together we feel God's presence, we pray for God's purposes, and we really see young adults from the nations, their eyes get open to what God's doing. That's really what touches my heart. I've got a lot of expectation for that. But I also have expectation that as a global church, we continue to move forward in supporting Israel in a robust way, a Jesus-centered way. We begin to engage in social justice from a biblical perspective. And we also, as a church, we begin to engage Islam. How do we deliver the gospel to the Muslims? So those are things that are all in my heart for this year.
자, 그럼 이제 금년도 2016년도 원킹 컨퍼런스에 대해서 좀 구체적으로 소개를 해 주시죠. 몇 월 며칠부터 며칠까지, 장소는 어디고, 아침부터 저녁까지 일정, 이런 거를 좀 얘기를 해 주시죠.
What we do is we spend the first 2 days in Galilee in the north. And so those are full days that we do touring during the day. And then the evening we'll have some connections with local believers. So you get a chance to actually interact with some Arab believers, some congregations as well as some Messianic congregations. And then we move down to Jerusalem and that's when we do our tour, our conference. So we'll open up. The first day there'll be an evening session that we'll do prayer, worship together, and also a teaching session. And then the next 2 days are very full days. And what we do is we do morning worship, then we have a session. And some of those sessions are led by local believers, local ministries, and others by some of our international speakers coming in. And that's where we'll cover these subjects I mentioned, like Israel. We'll cover we'll talk about the prayer movement. What's the prayer movement doing in Israel and the nations around it? And the issue of social justice in Islam. And then again, we do the evening sessions, have extended worship, and then a time of teaching, and then we do a time of prayer at the end. at the end of those sessions. And then following that, based on Jerusalem, we again kind of go and do touring around the region, including, of course, the sites around Jerusalem, all the way to Tel Aviv. But also throughout that, there's a lot of the schedule is to visit some of the different ministries in the land, to begin to let those who come experience what God's doing, build some relationships with what's happening, and experience different ministries in their environment. What's God doing in Tel Aviv? What's God doing around Jerusalem? What is He doing in Ashdod, in these different congregations? They get a chance to experience what God's doing, and then the rest of the day they get to visit some of the biblical sites where things happened in the Bible, so they can begin to help their Bible come more alive. So that's the schedule that we're looking at this year.
이 방송을 보는 한국의 우리 크리스천들도 예루살렘에 가서 함께 그 원킹 컨퍼런스에 동참하고 싶어 하시는 분들도 많을 것 같아요. 그 컨퍼런스에 동참하고 싶으신 분들은 어떻게 연락을 하면 될까요? 미리 접수를 받습니까?
The dates of this year's event will start June 24th and go through July 7th. Some of our main sessions will, during the conference, will be held at Christ Church right in Jerusalem. And we love that location because it's right in the heart of Jerusalem, so it lets you kind of experience what life is like in Jerusalem. We have a website that has information. It's One King 2016, so oneking2016.com. That's the best way for people to get information about the conference. From there, they can also contact us if they have special questions. For example, if they want to bring a group, they can ask all those questions, and we can be happy to answer them and any questions they have about the event. But that website would be the place to go for more information.
좀 많은 분들이 그 현장에 좀 동참했으면 좋겠습니다. 한국의 시청자들에게, 우리 브래드 TV 시청자들에게 바라고 싶은 이번 행사를 위한 기도 제목이 있으면 얘기해 주시죠.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Brad TV, because it's just a privilege to get to talk to you and share with you about One King. And I would say one reason why it's so special to me is I think the unique calling that rests on the Korean people. I just have a strong belief that there's a prophetic destiny for the Korean people related to the salvation of Israel. One, for the prayer movement. We're so grateful for the prayer movement in America and different nations, but in the 20th century, it was really the Korean people that really launched night and day 24-hour prayer. And again, the Bible tells us that's a key component of His plan to save Israel and save Jerusalem. The other thing is, again, one of our big burdens is that when the global church thinks about Israel, whether they think about the Jewish people or the Arab people, that we think about it in a Jesus-centered, how do we deliver the gospel? And again, I think when you look across the nations of the earth, the Korean people stand out as leaders in the movement in the nations, in the missions movement in the nations, to go and deliver the gospel. Wherever I travel in the Middle East and other countries, I always find the Koreans there, both helping raise the house of prayer, but also delivering the gospel. I would say, pray for us that we are able to express the Lord's heart to those. What is the Lord's heart for the Jewish people and the Arab people? We would appreciate our prayers, appreciate your prayers, just for all the practical things of the conference, but also join with us. This is our prayer, that the nations of the earth would be connected to God's heart for Israel and Jerusalem, but they'd be connected to it in a way that glorifies Jesus, in a way that delivers the gospel, that makes Him the center of the conversation. So if you would pray with us that we're able to be faithful to the call the Lord's given us, we would really appreciate that.
원킹 컨퍼런스가 열리는 예루살렘의 크라이스트 처치, 저는 그 교회를 여러 번 가봐서 어떤 교회인지 잘 알고 있습니다. 정말 아름다운 교회고 아름다운 장소에 있습니다. 그 아름다운 교회에서 팔레스타인 크리스천 청년들과 또 메시아닉주 청년들, 또 한국에서 온 우리 크리스천 청년들이 함께 두 손을 높이 들고 눈물을 흘리면서 하나님을 찬양하고 예수님을 찬양하고 뜨겁게 기도하는 그 현장을 머릿속에 그려보면 벌써부터 저는 감동에 젖게 됩니다. 금년 6월에 있게 될 그 현장에 여러분들을 초대합니다. 여러분들도 함께 그곳에서 이루어지고 있는 놀라운 사랑과 화해의 역사의 현장에서 그 목격자가 그 증인이 되어주시기를 바라겠습니다. 저희도 그 자리에 함께 있도록 하겠습니다. 오늘 이렇게 귀한 얘기해 주셔서 고맙고요. 이번 행사가 잘 되길 바라겠습니다. 감사합니다. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that day became cursed throughout history, and so that is why that event happened on that very day. You remember the story of the 10 spies who brought the bad report, and the 2, Joshua and Caleb, who brought the good report, and they had the big grape? Because they rejected the land and were afraid of the spies and didn't trust God, that day also became cursed throughout history. That happened on the 9th of Av, roughly our July, August. The temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar on that very day in 586 BC, and then 600 years later, Rome destroyed it in 70 AD on the very same day again. The year 1290, all the Jews were kicked out of England on the 9th of Av. 1492, all the Jews were kicked out of Spain on the 9th of Av. World War I started on the 9th of Av.
War of dramatic gains and losses.
Hitler's proclamation to kill the Jews was on the 9th of Av.
Der 6. Parteitag der Bewegung.
In 2005, again the Jews rejected the land, evacuating the Gaza Strip on the 9th of Av. The next year in 2006, the Lebanon War started on the 17th of Tammuz, the same day they worshiped the golden calf. So what is so amazing is when you can take your newspaper and have a biblical calendar and look at the events and when they're happening on the biblical calendar. So I want to encourage those of you who are interested in prophecy to get on God's calendar so you'll know when these prophecies are fulfilled.
하늘의 징조와 그 역사, 세계 역사와 성경과 그 과학을 연계해서 말씀을 이렇게 해주니까 너무나 확실하게 이렇게 들려왔고.
솔로몬에 대한 강의는 진짜 좀 충격이었어요.
앞으로 나타날 적그리스도가 어떤 모습인지가 솔로몬을 통해서 너무나 명확하게